First, to make rice paste, I will use two types of flour: glutinous rice flour and pure potato starch, together with some granulated or caster sugar. Glutinous rice is a short grain rice widely grown in many Asian countries like Vietnam, my own country, China, Thailand, Laos, Indonesia, Japan, and etc. It is used in most Asian countries to make traditional cakes or desserts. The word glutinous means sticky. It's nothing related to gluten. Glutinous rice flour is gluten-free, and it has other names like a sticky rice flour, sweet rice flours, or mochiko flours in Japanese language. You can find this flour in most Asian countries to buy. I also found this type of flour in many countries where I have been there to teach. But if you cannot find glutinous rice flour at Asian markets or Asian food counters at supermarkets in the place where you live, you can buy online on Amazon. Glutinous rice flour has 100% of amylopectin in it, so when being cooked properly, it can make itself into a very pliable paste. Like these climbing ropes, I made it quite a long time ago using rice-based flour, and the recipe has glutinous rice flour only. But glutinous rice flour will shrink a bit when it dries if you use the recipe using glutinous rice only. Like this, you can see they have a lot of movement, like ruffles on it. Actually, I didn't craft quite a lot on the petals, but it will create ruffles themselves when it gets dry. And the other thing is, it will become very fragile when it gets dry if you use glutinous rice flour only for the recipe. And for the ruffles, it is really suitable for flowers like roses or peonies, the types of flowers with a lot of movements. But for flowers with less ruffled petals or straight edges, like orchids or classic ranunculus, that is not a proper paste. That's why I will add another ingredient to the paste, potato starch, to stabilize the rice paste. With this combo, glutinous rice flour and potato starch, you can make rice paste for any kind of flour, either it is ruffle style or non-ruffle styles. Potato starch is a very popular type of flour to thicken the food that you cook, so I hope that you can find it available where you live. To make the paste sweet enough to eat and more pliable, I will add granulated or caster sugar as white as possible. You can also use corn syrup to add more sweetness to the paste, but the rice paste using corn syrup in it will be more fragile when it gets dry. These are only flours, so I need to add liquid to the flours mixture to make it into a paste. For this recipe, I will use hot boiling water, not normal water, not warm water. It must be hot boiling water immediately from the stove. Hot boiling water will help to boost the flowers so that it can bloom to its fullest and make the paste to achieve the most perfect texture. So now I will measure the ingredients. I will base my recipe on 200 grams of flour, of which 130 grams will go to glutinous rice flour, and 70 grams of potato starch, okay, 200 now. And then I will mix two flours together. I will reserve 2 spoonfuls of the flour onto the sealed pot to mix it in the paste later. I will add granulated sugar, 60 grams. Okay. Now I will bring the water to boil, and then I will add very hot boiling water from the stove. And the amount is 110 grams. Alright, so now I mix all the ingredients together until it is very well blended. It really depends on your own weather conditions to decide on the amount of water. You can add a little bit more water, like 5 or 10 grams more, if it is cooler or cold in the place where you live. But like in my city now, it is very humid because it has been raining for nearly a month. So the amount of water I use is only 110. It depends on the ingredients you use too. Because it is homemade, the materials you choose to buy and the quality of them can decide how the paste is. So now I will wear gloves and mix in all the ingredients. Okay, put it aside. Just knead it until all the dry flours around the bowl get into the mixture. Just keep kneading. Okay. And then put it in the reserved flours. And it is quite hard. But after some time you mix it, it becomes cooler. So I will use my bare hands to knead to make the work more comfortable. I will mix the dough into some reserved flour until find it less wet and become quite smooth and pliable. For this recipe, hot boiling water is a very important tip because it will help the flour, especially the glutinous rice flour, to bloom so that you can achieve a very good texture for flour making. Okay. Just keep kneading till it is quite smooth and become less tacky to your hands. Alright, it is quite smooth now, so I'm going to cook it. Okay, now we'll set the timer on my phone. I will set it at 3 minutes to cook. Okay, now start. Okay, so when cooking the batter, it's important that you have to cover the base in enough water and also cover the lid so that the water doesn't come out. Actually, I prefer using gas cooker because you can control the fire better than the induction stove. For the induction cooker, it is more difficult to control the temperature. If you put it too low, it will not brought to boil properly. In terms of time management, you can increase the time you cook it for 4 minutes if you live in a cooler or cold place. But in my city now it is very hot, so I always cook it 3 minutes. It is enough. Actually, rice paste depends a lot on the weather conditions. Time is up now. So we'll turn off the stove and pick up the dough from water. Shake it off a bit so that you can remove all the excess water from it. Okay, put the hot water aside. And then put the dough into the reserved flour so that all the flour cover the batter. So it's important to use chopstick now. It will help you with the hot dough. Okay, because it is very hot, I will use seal pad to knead the paste to prevent your hands from getting burning. Just keep kneading until all the reserved flour get into the paste. And another important tip in making it is rice when you cook it and pick it up from the stove, you have to knead it immediately. Don't leave it until it gets cooler to knead, because if so, it will become quite tough and less comfortable to work with. Alright, so when it gets a little bit cooler, you can add a layer of shortening to knead it so that it becomes smoother and even easier for you to knead until it has a perfect texture. Okay, it's become cooler now, so I want to use my bare hands to feel how smooth it is and whether it is pliable enough. Okay, so it's quite smooth now. I will cover it in cling film. Okay, put it here. And cover it in several layers of cling film to protect it from getting drying. Okay, and then we'll store this batch in the fridge, and it can stay fresh in the fridge for 4 days. You can also store it in the freezer, but it will get very hard when it is out of the fridge, and it will take time to bring it to normal room temperature. So I recommend that you just cook small batches so that you can have very fresh base to work with if you don't need quite a lot at a time. Also, I don't like the idea of cooking a very big batch because when you cook it in hot water, it will be very quick for the paste to get well done from the outside, but the inside will be less well done, so it is not very well blended and it will be not a perfect paste for you to work with. The paste itself can have more or less moisture in it, depends on how much water and the ingredients that you use. It is homemade, so it is a little bit flexible. And as I said earlier, it also depends a lot on the weather conditions. If it is humid in your area, you have to add less water than in cooler conditions, or even in very cold, dry place, you have to add a little bit more, like 5 or 10 grams of hot boiling water into the same amount of ingredients. And we should also store the paste in the fridge overnight, although you can use it immediately after you cook it. But I really like the texture of the paste from the fridge overnight. It will be whiter, firmer, very smooth and pliable. Okay, so now I will show you how to tint rice paste in 3 different colors: soft pink, deep fuchsia, and leaf green, which I will use for our flowers and leaves today. You may know very well how to tint gum paste, but it's still interesting to know how it will work out on rice paste, right? Let me say it's nothing different in the tinting techniques. For the baby pink, the soft pink, you may use any gel color, any brand, either red or pink to tint it. But for red, which is more intense in the shade of color, use less. And if it is pink, you can use a little bit more. However, whether it is red or pink, just use very tiny touches to make it very soft. And then if you are not happy with the shade, you can add more later. Don't start with using a large amount of gel color first, because later on you will have to add more white paste to neutralize the color. Meanwhile, you don't want to use a lot of paste at one time. I will use Color Rosa by R-Color, a gel color brand from Brazil, to tint the paste either in soft pink or deep fuchsia. Because I don't want to add a lot of color at one time, I will pump a big drop on a plate instead of pumping the color right on the paste. And these are the paste that I store in the fridge from last night. You see it become whiter and the texture is more interesting, it's more pliable and smooth. I will add a little shortening because I find it a little tacky to my hands when I knead it. Because it is right away from the fridge, I need to knead it again to make it more pliable at room temperature. Okay, so now grab a bamboo skewer and dip it in the color, and then add tiny touches on the base first. So that's about the technique to tint very soft pink, very soft colors. I always start with very little amount of the gel color and knead it very well again. The color is gradually blended into the paste. Actually, I find no difference in tinting work compared to traditional mediums like a fondant or gum paste. But for rice paste, as you know, as I said earlier, it is slower in drying, so it is easier for you to work with. You can take your time to tint it at ease. And the paste is also quite soft to knead, so the tinting work become more comfortable. Okay, so I love this baby pink. It's very soft. If you want the shade to be darker, you can add a little bit more, a very tiny touch of the pink to it. But I find this shade is so lovely. Cover it in cling film again for later use. So it's a good method to start with tiny touches of the color if you want a small batch of it to work with. But if you want a bigger batch in a uniform color, add a little bit more colors to make it darker. If it becomes darker than you wanted, you can add more white paste to it to soften the shade later. That's soft pink. Now I will add a lot more of the same color to achieve this deep fuchsia. Now we will add. This time you can pump the color directly on the base because we will need quite a lot to make it dark fuchsia. And I find that it is quite difficult to achieve dark fuchsia by mixing different gel colors together. So what I think is try to look for a color, a brand that you can be successful with immediately. Luckily, I found our color when I came to Sao Paulo, Brazil last year to teach. And it's like a wow, all the colors are so beautiful and it's so easy for me to achieve the shades that I want. Keep adding more color until you achieve the desired shade. So you can wear gloves when you tint the base to avoid getting stains on your hands. But I myself find comfortable to use my bare hands to tint because I can feel the softness, the pliability of the base, and it is really interesting. Okay, so keep adding more colors to make it darker. Okay, and here it is. So beautiful, so fuchsia. All right. Normally, if you want a darker shade, always stop at a softer shade because we will need to leave it to rest so that the base will darken itself after resting, maybe for a couple of hours or overnight. All right, I will cover it in several layers of cling film again. One thing about the tinting work is when you add more colors to the base, like a fondant or gum paste, the base itself will become softer. So when you work on the base and you find it quite soft to work with, like it's quite tacky or even sticky on your hands or on the tool or working counter, you can leave it open. No need to cover it in cling film until you find the consistency is better to work with, and then cover it in the cling film again. It also depends on the weather conditions in your living place. Like here in my city, it's very humid nowadays because it is rainy seasons and it has been raining for nearly a month. The paste after tinting can be always very soft compared to the same paste in drier condition. Apart from leaving it unopened when you work on it so that it becomes firmer, and then wrap it later, as I said earlier, I can use other methods to make the paste in a better condition, close to perfect consistency. That's about how to control the dryness in your working room. For example, during hot, humid days, I will use air conditioner. During cool but humid days, I will use dehumidifier. However, the most important thing to remember about rice paste is that it is very sensitive to air conditioner. So if you cannot stand working without aircon in your own weather conditions, try to stay away from direct wind of the aircon and try to move yourself into a better corner of your working room so that you can still feel cool at the same time and your paste doesn't get dry too quickly. And in normal dryness, rice paste flour will naturally get dry, and in that kind of condition it is quite perfect. It is much stronger than gum paste. Okay, and then for green shades for the leaves of the project today, I will use the same method of tinting using moss green. You can add a little bit of the color first, and then if it is too light for you, you can add more, or you can combine moss green and juniper green by Winton to achieve more interesting paste. Many people have been asking me about how the rice paste can stand humidity, and let me say that it dries out quite amazingly even in humidity, and to keep the shape, the form of the flowers in good condition for a long time, it is important that you have to let it dry out totally first. And then when it is exposed to more humidity, like when you deliver the flowers on the cake to your customers and there is a lot more moisture out of your room, it will stand much better than sugar flowers and it will not fall down for a while. However, it is an edible medium, so it's not a magic. So if you don't store it properly, it may collapse too. And one more thing that I want to recommend about how to store the flowers when they are already dry is that to keep the room where you store the flowers in very dry conditions. Try not to open the windows or the main door, especially when it is so humid outside. Okay, that's everything about making rice paste from scratch. I hope that you enjoyed getting to know the new medium, and see you in the next lesson.